Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Orphan Train Tragedy by Rachel Wesson, narrated by Ruth, Urquhart. Chapter 1. New York, April 1904. Kathleen Green looked furtively around her as she walked down the street toward the tenement building. The biting wind chilled her to the bone as she drew her coat closed. She passed dirty children dressed in threadbare clothes. Dressed being an overstatement, as in some cases the children wore little more than a rag to cover their dignity. She didn't fear these children. They were too young. She wanted to stop and share the contents of her basket, but there were too many. If she gave food to one, she would be overwhelmed and could cause a riot. The older ones, the ones who had fallen into gangs, were another story. They would knock her down and steal her basket without a second's thought. She didn't blame them either. She knew what it was like to go to bed hungry, to endure bellyaches so severe they would make a grown man cry. Closing her eyes, she could picture her sisters, Maura and Bridget, trying to keep a fire going with newspapers. They didn't have the money for coal, and newspapers were often discarded. They didn't produce a long-lasting heat as they flared up and out the chimney. She kept a firm grip on her basket, picking her way through the discarded litter. The early frost was gone, leaving a pile of slush in its wake. Children passed her, staring at the ground. She assumed they were collecting cigarette ends, probably in the hope of harvesting the remaining tobacco and selling it to those who rolled their own cigarettes. The more enterprising would buy a packet of cigarette papers and roll them to sell on as individual cigarettes. Those in more desperate need of money would find other things to sell. She shut her mind off to the route her thoughts were taking. If Lily knew she was visiting this place without Minnie Mike or Tommy to look out for her, she would have a fit. But Kathleen didn't want anyone questioning why she was visiting Granny Belbin, or worse, offering to accompany her. As she walked, her mind drifted back to the days when she'd lived here. If it hadn't been for her sister Bridget and Lily, where would she be now? Kathleen Green, you need to get a grip on yourself. She should be counting her blessings, not looking for trouble. Maybe she should go back to the sanctuary. What she was doing was silly. "Morning, Kathleen. You look grand." Kathleen started. She hadn't seen Colm Fleming coming toward her. He was married now with his own family. "Morning, Colm. How's your family? And your dad?" "Dad and the family are grand. Mary is expecting again. I told her no more, but she sure loves having a baby in the house." Kathleen steeled her expression, not wanting her old friend to get a hint of her distress at the mention of babies. He looked uncomfortable. "Where are you off to? You shouldn't be wandering these streets on your own. Why didn't Tommy or Mike come with you?" "They were busy, Colm. Don't worry, I won't be stopping long. I have a letter for Granny Belbin from Kenny." "By the smell coming from that basket, you seem to have brought her some treats, too." Kathleen caught the glimpse of hunger in his eyes. "Cook just gets better at baking. Want to try some?" "No, I couldn't," Colm said. "You keep it for Granny." "Colm, you know she won't eat it all, but will give it to her birds and whatever other animals she is tending this week. Take a small bit. Hold the basket for me, please." Kathleen took 2 cookies and put them in a napkin. She gave the parcel to Colm and took back her basket. "Thanks, Kathleen. I will have a grand breakfast. I best get on my way. I'm on afternoon shift. Be careful. Mind how you go." "You too, Colm, and good luck with the new baby." Kathleen continued walking, wondering how her old friend would feed his growing family. She would speak to Lily about getting a parcel of clothes and other goodies sent over to his wife. What Colm needed was someone like his mother. When Mrs. Fleming had been alive, she had helped save many in the tenements, including Kathleen and her family. She strode through a small alley before coming to Granny's front door. Taking a deep breath, she knocked. Granny Belbin took her time to answer. She was getting less steady on her feet, but refused to admit she was too old to live alone. She opened the door a fraction. Then, seeing Kathleen, she opened it wider to let her enter, greeting her with a moan. "'Tis yourself.
I wondered if you had forgotten about me."
Kathleen ignored the cranky tone. "I brought you some cookies. I thought you might like company." Granny Belvin raked Kathleen from head to foot.
"You got something on your mind. You're here for more than just a visit. Out with it. Is it Kenny?"
Kathleen forced a smile on her face, not wanting to show how nervous she was. Granny could tell what she was thinking. No, that was silly. Nobody could read someone's mind, not even when they had the gift of reading tea leaves. A large fire roared in the chimney, a sign Minnie, Mike and Tommy were keeping Granny in comfort. Kathleen shivered despite the warmth of the room. She shouldn't be thinking of messing with things she didn't understand. She didn't realise she'd stayed silent so long until Granny spoke again.
"Are you going to stand there like a mute or start talking?"
"Granny, Kenny is fine. In fact, he wrote to you again. I brought his letter. I would love to hear how he is." Kathleen knew Granny Belvin couldn't read any more. Nobody knew if she ever could, but now she blamed her eyesight. But God help anyone who mentioned her lack of ability. The woman was likely to show the person the door in due speed.
"Suit yourself. I suppose you want a cup of tea, too."
Kathleen nodded her head, took off her coat and hung it on the peg on the back of the door.
"Make yourself at home, why don't you?"
Granny muttered. Kathleen sighed. She was regretting the visit already. Chapter 2. When Kathleen had first come to visit the old woman, she wondered how Lily had the patience to deal with the grumpy old lady. But after all these years she understood it was anxiety that made Granny the way she was. Life around her was changing. In the old days she could put the fear of God into the local kids. She'd saved Minnie, Mike and Tommy from the streets and quite a few others. But now, with the likes of Monk Eastman and the other gangs in the area, she didn't feel as protected. Minnie, Mike and Tommy had put the word out that she was untouchable, but still the old lady fretted. Kathleen wished she would come live at the sanctuary, but when Lily offered the invitation, Granny told Lily to leave and take her workhouse with her. Kathleen smiled at the memory of Lily's face when she told Kathleen what the woman had said. Lily was so affronted. She didn't care Granny had banned her from visiting. Lily swore she wouldn't come to see the old woman again until her temper settled. But being kind-hearted, Lily always made sure Tommy or Mike took a basket of goodies to Granny and checked up on the old woman regularly.
"Will you start on the letter, or is it Christmas you was waiting for?"
Granny asked, pulling Kathleen out of her thoughts. "Sorry." Kathleen opened the envelope in front of Granny to prove she hadn't read it before her visit. She coughed to clear her voice and then started to read. "Dear Granny, myself and Jack Jr. are doing fine now. Junior was sad for a while after Jack died, but now he is back to normal. I told him Jack was old and in pain. 10 years is a good age for a dog, don't you think?" Kathleen exchanged a smile with Granny before continuing the letter. "I hate my new school, but Ma won't listen. I want to be back with Mrs. Collins, but she says I am too old. She says the new master will teach me, as he knows more than she does. I don't think she's right. The new master doesn't seem to know much. He never heard of Hell's Kitchen or Monk Eastman or nothing like that."
"Why would anyone need to know about Eastman?"
Granny asked, but Kathleen assumed the question was rhetorical. She continued to read. "How are you? I hope you are eating properly. Would you come and visit me? Ma says there is plenty of room at her new home. We will take in children from New York. Maybe you could help Ma with them." Granny cackled, interrupting Kathleen. She glanced at the old woman, afraid she was going to choke, but Granny continued to laugh.
"Can you imagine me running around a crowd of children? Those days be long gone. Still, what's your sister getting involved with more kids for? I thought she had a weak heart."
Kathleen bristled as she always did when someone spoke disparagingly about her family. "Her heart is doing much better. Bridget feels the need to care for children, and what better way than to take some orphans to live with her?" Granny didn't react well to her tone.
"There are better ways. Keep them with their families for a start."
"Granny, don't start that again," Kathleen warned. "We don't steal children. We only send real orphans with no family or children whose parents can't keep them."
Shush! You need not lecture me. I heard it all before. What else does the lad say?
Kathleen looked back at the letter and continued to read. Kenny sounded like he was having a lot of fun and enjoying Riverside Springs. Then she came to the last paragraph. "Granny, I got a favour to ask ye. Would you put a flower on Mary's grave for her birthday next week? She always liked flowers. I best go as Ma's calling for me. Love you. Kenny. P.S. I am coming back to New York in about 2 years' time. I want to join the Navy and see the world. Ma isn't too happy, but Dad told her she has to let me grow up and make my own decisions. She didn't like that much. She gave him a dirty look, and he told me he was in the doghouse." Granny sighed, looking out toward the window, not that she could see anything through the dirt and grime on the glass.
Young Kenny always had a wanderlust in him. I remember his sister Mary travelling the streets looking for that lad, always getting in the middle of things. But the Navy, what does he want to go to sea for? He'll get seasick, maybe even drown.
Kathleen didn't want to think about Kenny drowning. She was fond of the boy her sister had adopted. "Did you make the tea, or would you like me to do it?" Kathleen asked, attempting to distract the woman.
Keen on having your tea today, aren't you? Do you want me to read the leaves?
Chapter 3. Embarrassed, Kathleen wasn't sure what to say. She didn't believe in the whole reading tea leaves thing. The church frowned on such practices. But what if it could tell her? Nothing else seemed to work. She tried touching a rabbit's foot, and goodness knew what else. Granny moved restlessly in her seat.
"Do you or don't you? I ain't got all day."
Tempted to ask what else the old woman was going to do, Kathleen bit her tongue. There was no point in antagonizing her.
"Sure, go on then. Just this once. Only don't tell Father Nelson."
Granny stood up, swaying. Kathleen wanted to help, but she knew she would only be rebuffed. Granny glanced at her.
"Why would I be telling a priest anything?"
"Granny, you can pretend with the others, but I know you like Father Nelson. You two have great chats. He told me how interesting your life was." Granny's forehead creased. Kathleen immediately regretted saying anything, but it was too late.
"He told you about what we talked about?"
"No, Granny, not at all. That's private. He just said he looks forward to seeing you and chatting with you." Granny bustled about getting cups and saucers and the tea. Then she set it on the table.
He has little to amuse him. Now come over here and sit down. It's easier for me. Clear that stuff out of the way."
Kathleen did as she was bid. Granny sat down opposite her, stirring the pot before pouring.
"Right, well, drink up that cup of tea and let's see what the leaves say."
Kathleen drank the tea, trying not to grimace at the state of the cup. Then she handed it back to Granny, who placed it on the table and appeared to study it. She was quiet for so long, Kathleen couldn't bear it.
"What does it say?" "Kathleen, you can't interrupt and rush things. It takes time. Are you sure you want to know?"
"Of course," Kathleen replied, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. Her stomach was churning, and the hairs in the back of her neck stood on end. A picture of her mother suddenly darted into her head. She would have given her more than a touch of the wooden spoon for mixing with stuff like this. Filled with doubts, Kathleen stood up.
"Granny, I best be going. I forgot. You sit back down and listen to the leaves. You can't just walk out now. Upset the forces, that would."
Kathleen shivered, looking around the room despite herself. This was plain silly. She was a grown woman, not a child scared of some bogey man. Granny continued to speak, but her voice didn't sound like it was coming from her. It sounded like a young male with a strong New York accent.
"You have a long way to travel, or maybe someone near to you is going on a trip."
Well, that cleared everything up, Kathleen fumed. She was surrounded by children who went on orphan trains. It wasn't hard to imagine someone leaving.
"You won't have a child of your own if you stay in your marriage. The fault isn't with you."
Kathleen stared at Granny, but the woman had her eyes closed. She pinched herself. Was it Richard who couldn't father a child? How could Granny know that? She was about to ask, but Granny opened her eyes and started talking again.
I see a fire. A young girl, helpless and alone. She needs a home.
Kathleen sat forward.
What girl? Where is she? Where are her parents?
But her questions went unanswered. Granny continued staring at the cup and speaking in the male voice.
There is a woman with a black cat. She doesn't like you or your orphans. She means you harm.
Kathleen bit her lip in an effort not to laugh. Granny was really trying to wind her up with her talk of women with black cats. Why didn't she say a witch was going to fly over on her broomstick? Disgusted with herself for even thinking of asking Granny to read the leaves, Kathleen gathered her things together. She was about to stand up when Granny spoke again.
A foreign boy. He will go with you on the trip. He has a great future ahead of him.
But, Kathleen prompted, totally caught up in the moment.
You must find him the right home. His happiness is in your hands.
Kathleen sat back in her seat. Granny was playing with her. Of course the children's futures lay with her. Her and the rest of the group working at the sanctuary and the outplacement homes. Granny didn't like them taking children away from New York. This was her way of making Kathleen squirm. Kathleen went to stand up, but Granny made a sound, and it terrified Kathleen. She glanced at the old woman, and was immediately sorry she did, for Granny was crossing herself. This from a woman who said she didn't practice her religion any more. Kathleen's heart raced.
What is it? Tell me.
Nothing. Kathleen couldn't let it go.
Granny, I'm a grown woman. I know you saw something. Please tell me.
But even as she said the words, she kept thinking of the Bible and how it forbade conjuring up spirits. Father Nelson would be furious.
See these leaves. They say something bad is coming.
Granny held out the cup, her hands shaking. Afraid she would drop it, Kathleen reluctantly took the piece of crockery.
Like bad weather.
Kathleen's joke didn't amuse Granny. She took the cup away and muttered to herself. Kathleen didn't want to know any more. She had to get out of the room.
Granny, it's late, and I best get back to the sanctuary. I have things to sort out before the next orphan train goes out. I will ask Minnie, Mike, or Tommy to come see you soon. Take care.
Granny grabbed Kathleen's arm in a vice-like grip. Stay away from the water.
Now you are scaring me. It's not nice.
I mean it, Granny said, looking serious. The leaves don't lie. There is something bad. The leaves are at the bottom of the cup. If it were the past, they would rise to the top. Granny stared into Kathleen's eyes, but it was as if she could see right into her thoughts. I know it's a baby you want. Be careful what you wish for, young Kathleen Collins. Kathleen didn't bother to correct her name. She wanted to go, out of the dark room, for the walls seemed to come in on top of her. She snatched up her hat, muttered goodbye, and was out the door before Granny could say another word. She walked as quickly as the hem of her skirt would let her. Why had she gotten involved in something stupid? Hadn't her mum always said it didn't pay to mix with the dark world? She would stop at the church and light a candle. But what if Father Nelson caught her? He'd know she was upset the moment he saw her. She wasn't about to admit to him she had been getting her fortune read. Kathleen Green, you can be a right Egypt. Chapter 4. Teddy Doherty waited at the window for his father to come home. He was always late home from work, but today he had promised to come early.
Teddy, come away from the window. It won't help make Charlie come faster. But, Mom, he said he will be home early, in time for our birthday party.
His mom pushed her hair from her eyes as she smiled at him.
Darling, when did your father ever break his promise? Now come and help me set the table. That's girls' work. Gracie and Evie should do it. Theodore Doherty, you mind your manners. Your sisters have their own chores and are not your maidservants. Laurie has already done his bit by collecting the shopping. Now, do what I tell you before I send you to bed. Mom, you wouldn't do that on my birthday, he whined. I'm 10 today.
Too late, he caught the look his mother exchanged with her friend Kathleen Green. He liked Kathleen. She was like his auntie, but even she looked rather cross today. It wasn't fair. It was his birthday. Everyone should be happy. Kathleen spoke sharply.
Teddy, 10 years old is old enough to know when to admit you are wrong. Off you go now and help your mother.
Kathleen put her hand on his shoulder, rubbing it slightly before pushing him toward the door. He knew it was time to leave and not grumble. But as he closed the door behind him, he couldn't stop himself listening to their conversation.
Poor Teddy. He's just desperate to get his hands on his presents, his mother said. That child was born without patience, not like Laurie.
Teddy sighed. Saint Laurie struck again. He loved his twin, he did, but sometimes, occasionally, he wished it were his twin who did something wrong, just for a change.
Teddy's the image of you, Lily. He can't bear to sit still but has to be on the go all the time. Don't look at me like that. You can't deny it. 5 children under the age of 10 and you are still working all the hours you can at the sanctuary. Richard worries about you. We all do. Kathleen, don't fret for goodness sake. Hard work killed no one. Charlie is so busy at work these days. Seems to be no end to the corruption his bosses are investigating. Not that you are one to talk. We see more of you now than ever before. Are things all right between you and Richard?
Teddy moved away from the door. He shouldn't be listening to the adults. He didn't like hearing anyone was worried about his mother. She was his world. He was so proud of what she had achieved. She took him to the sanctuary with her sometimes. He got to play with the children going on the trains. He was often tempted to slip aboard one of those trains and go on an adventure just like the boys did in the books his father read to him. Totally forgetting about the table, he went to find Laurie. Maybe his brother would finally get his nose out of his book and go outside to play ball. He found Laurie with his nose in a newspaper. Tempted to grab the paper out of his twin's hands, he stamped down the impulse.
Want to go and play ball? Teddy asked. Pa isn't home yet. Teddy, read this. The Wright brothers say we'll all be able to fly someday. We could take a plane to Europe. Wouldn't that be amazing? Sure.
Teddy didn't bother to hide his lack of interest. What was so wonderful about Europe anyway? Didn't they live in the best country in the world? In the best city? They didn't need to go travelling. If his brother wanted to meet people from Europe, all he had to do was walk down 2 blocks and meet Germans or Polish people or any other nationality. He threw himself on the bed, wishing for about the 100th time he had more brothers. Grace wasn't too bad for a girl. She was quite a good catcher, actually. But Evie, she didn't want to do anything but play with dolls. As for Colleen, she just ate and slept. Babies were so dull. He sighed, causing Laurie to look at him.
What's up with you? His brother asked. Aren't you excited about Dad coming home? Yes, but he isn't here yet. He said he would be back by 4 with a surprise for us. You know, Dad, he'll be here. Why don't you do something to pass the time? I want to play ball, Teddy explained, but I can't do that by myself.
Laurie looked at the newspaper in his hands, then at Teddy, and back to the paper. It was clear he was torn between wanting to please his brother and read about his favourite subject. Please, Lawrence. I already got in trouble with Mom. I can't sit here doing nothing. Save me. Laurie threw a pillow at him. After this much practice getting into trouble, you should be able to save yourself. Come on, then. I'm batting. Teddy whistled. He didn't care if he had to pitch so long as he was outside. Thanks, Laurie. It's okay. You can pay me back by letting me open my present first. Laurie winked at him to show he was joking. In all their years, Laurie had never opened a present quickly, but was content to pull back the paper slowly to reveal what was inside. By the time he found out what he had gotten, Teddy would be playing with his gift. Teddy clapped Laurie on the back. You know, you're not too awful for a brother. Laurie seemed to stand taller, but he didn't reply. They were soon in the garden, playing and laughing, all worries forgotten. Chapter 5. They play well together, don't they? Kathleen stared out the window at the twins. They do, despite their differences, Lily agreed. They're close, too close. I know Grace feels left out. Grace is almost 9. She doesn't know whether to be a child or a little lady. It's an awkward stage. She's a real mother hen, too. You mean how she looks after the younger children? Lily asked. Yes, I'm proud of her. I never knew she was learning German. She seems to have a gift for languages. She wants to be a teacher when she grows up. Kathleen continued to stare out the window, refusing to look at Lily, although she knew of her scrutiny given the pink colour in her cheeks. Are you going to tell me what's wrong, Kathleen? You know I would never repeat anything. I'm worried about you. You smile and pretend all is right in your world, but your eyes hold a sadness I haven't seen since before you found Shane. At the mention of her brother, Kathleen smiled slightly, but it didn't remove the sadness. Lily took her arm and led her friend to the sofa, where she sat beside her. Kathleen, tell me, please. Kathleen looked everywhere but at Lily. Lily could feel the shudders running through her friend. Alarmed, she put her arm around Kathleen's shoulders and pulled her close. Something broke inside Kathleen, and the tears, once they fell, didn't stop for some time. Finally, after a deep shudder, Kathleen broke away and rummaged in her purse for a hanky. Lily handed her one of hers. It's clean, she promised. I hope you feel a little better. A cry often does that. Look at me, Lily. I'm a mess. A grown-up woman crying like a baby. I don't know what's wrong with me. I have everything I could want. A good husband. Patrick is doing well with school. A wonderful home and amazing friends. I have nothing to cry about. Lily paused, wondering if now was a good time. She glanced at the clock, but it would be a while before Charlie would be home. The children were occupied. Kathleen, why don't you and Richard seek help? Kathleen looked shocked, and for a second Lily wished she could take back her question. She held Kathleen's gaze, remaining silent. For what? I know you have Patrick, and he is a wonderful blessing, but you were born to be a mother. You and Richard, well, it's been 7 years since you got married. Haven't you waited long enough? Lily hesitated. Kathleen's cheeks were bright red, almost a match for her own. I don't mean to pry. Maybe you both decided you didn't want a family of your own, aside from Patrick, I mean. Kathleen shook her head, the tears once more rolling down her cheek. I love Patrick, I do. But in 2 years, he will be gone. He wants to study at Johns Hopkins, so Richard is doing everything he can to help him get into the school. Then the house will be so empty. Richard works hard. I know his work is valuable, but it means you are left too much on your own. No wonder you come to the sanctuary so often. Have you spoken to Richard about how you feel? Kathleen nodded. She stared toward the unlit fire. He said, we just need to be patient. He thinks the traumas I faced growing up may have caused some problems. I think he's just telling me that. He knows I'm a failure. I can't give him children. He would be better off without me. Kathleen Green, you stop that nonsense this minute. You and Richard are a team, a wonderful one. Anyone with eyes in their heads can see your husband is besotted with you. Kathleen didn't reply, but stared past Lily. Kathleen, how do you know the problem lies with you? It could just as easily be Richard. He's the doctor. He knows it takes 2 people to make a baby, and if the baby doesn't arrive, it isn't always the woman who has the problem. I think you should seek advice from someone like Dr. Pennington. Richard wouldn't like it. Richard is a wonderful man, but he is a doctor who specializes in burns. How would he feel if Dr. Pennington tried to treat a burn victim? Lily could see her point.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?